Joe, you're talking about stimulus to the tune of $60 billion. Can you explain to our viewers what your analysis shows?
Absolutely. So we started having a look at the household income cliff that is coming and the measures that we could put in place to help address that. So bringing forward the second stage of the income tax cuts and also extending the additional Jobseeker payment above the old New Start rate. When we looked at those measures do reduce unemployment, which of course is critically important in recovery. But what we also found is that you need infrastructure spending to really bring that unemployment rate down. So the $60 billion is a combination of infrastructure spending and those two measures.
And Joe, when you talk about increasing Jobseeker or the dole as it used to be known, are you saying that the supplement that's paid, from the budget next week should remain where it is, or what's the number you're looking at?
So we modelled maintaining that $250 additional payment, which came into effect this week, over a 2-year horizon. Whether or not you do something permanent is obviously a little bit more difficult, and setting the correct rate that balances support for our most vulnerable while keeping an incentive to work is actually a really tricky issue and not one that we covered. I think the issue is, though, that without additional support, households are facing $23 billion less income in the December quarter than the September quarter, and it's too early in our recovery to absorb that sort of decline.
So do you think there should be, in addition to the Jobseeker, the analysis suggests that there needs to be one-off payments as well?
Absolutely. So we also looked at a third round of the $750 payments that we saw in April and July. And the reason that that's so effective is that that's paid into those most likely to spend it, which is low-income earners. In fact, Australians on the lowest income quartile have a negative savings rate. So you do get a spend into the economy right now, and that's very effective fiscal stimulus.
We got a reminder just now with the Queensland Premier, the borders remains a potent political issue at the moment. It's also an economic issue, isn't it? The sooner the better for reopening, I would have thought.
Look, from an economic perspective, we know that when we close our domestic borders, it has an economic impact on both sides of the border. So to the extent that we can safely reopen our borders, we will see a positive economic impact from that.
When you look at the budget, it's one of the most important in living memory from Josh Frydenberg next week. How important is it to balance the infrastructure spend federally with what we're seeing in various levels from the states?
Yeah, so we've got this interesting issue at the moment around what is generally delivered by states, such as infrastructure spending, for example, and what can the federal government control. And not just control, but bear in mind that the federal government is more able to raise more debt at a cheaper rate. So we will be looking for the federal government to support some measures that will ultimately be implemented by the states, and infrastructure is a classic example of that.
We're talking about the lowest borrowing rates, the lowest interest rates, on record. So the government needs to capitalise on that, surely.
Absolutely. Look, I used to think that when we funded policies through debt that we were borrowing growth from the future, but I must admit I now think about it as a bet on the future, and a bet on the future Australia that we want to grow and we want to leave for future generations. And look, debt is just so cheap. Even with the additional spending that we've already announced with the eye-watering debt levels, actually the interest payment as a percentage of GDP will remain about half the rate it was after the global financial crisis. So this is debt we can afford. We're a AAA rated economy.